Welcome to Tales in the Temple Tankard. I am Jim, aka Argent Wind, your host for DM&D Chat, Episode 2. Those of you who were here last week, thank you very much for being here and answering asking some questions and participating. It was great having everyone here. We are going to be talking about campaigns this week, following up from our talk about world building last week. And you can actually still watch that video on our channel. It's available to go back and if you want to watch and see all about world building and everything else. We're moving on into campaigns, different styles of them, and then how to create them, continue, keep them going, and maybe even some ideas about ending them. And I know we already have people mentioning that very people actually are able to get all the way to an end of a campaign. And so I'm going to give some tips and tricks and that hopefully will help you maybe get there if you're running your own campaign. Before we jump in, though, I do want to say, first thing, we do have our Discord server where all of our like-minded gamers, the House of Gamers, in fact, with a Z, is the link is available in the description below. You should be able to jump in there and check it out and find all kinds of groups for different MMOs and different even our D&D channels and D&D groups there. We have D&D campaigns. We may have a new one starting up pretty soon, so keep an eye out for that and jump in that if you can. When signups become available. And if you're looking to run a D&D campaign, well, here you are for some tips and tricks on how to do just that. And hopefully we get some more games going and more players involved in our server. So again, thank you for being here. On Saturdays at 2 o'clock, my campaign runs, Avarice, The Shattered World, 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, here on our channels, both on YouTube and Twitch. And you're able to hop in there and check it out and listen in live or watch our back videos. We have those as well whenever you want them. So with that, though, let's get into talking about campaigns. So campaigns are the backbone to playing D&D. In the past, in the way back, we had campaign settings like Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms and Dark Sun and Spelljammer even was back in the 80s. And they're all just campaign settings with a lot of ideas for adventures and things, but DMs were kind of had to just make up their campaign as they went along. They might string together different modules or adventure seeds and develop them. And in recent times, we're seeing more actual campaign books coming out, like Curse of Strahd or Dragon Heist or Descent to Inverness. Um, and so these different campaign settings are available, and they're a great way to start off if you're a brand new dungeon master. There's no harm in getting in there, checking out a campaign that's been pre-made, and reading through. They already have the NPCs, the locations, the maps, and kind of a flow for the story, even a beginning and an end in those campaign settings. Um, so it's not a bad way for your first time to get in there and have that working with you. Now, you can obviously flesh it out and change it and tweak it however you want, but it's not a bad way to go for your first time. Or if you want to just, hey, I want to run a campaign, I don't want to do all that extra work, I'm going to grab this one and play through it. Totally cool. And they are available. Both the official ones and a lot of third-party ones are out there too. So there's a lot of fun ones out there. So check them out. It's not a bad way to go. But we're here to talk about creating your own campaign. Now, there are two kind of big buckets for campaign styles when you think about campaigns. First is kind of what they call a standard campaign, and it's very episodic narrative campaign. It's very similar to an MMO. You have a main quest, and you have little bits and pieces that happen along the main quest and drive you along the way. There are some side quests and some other things that can happen along the way as well, but you have that sort of driven narrative, very episodic. Um, it's also kind of like a TV season or a TV series, maybe even, where you have this long drawn out plot. Think of the X-Files. You have each season a long drawn out plot and that kind of goes along with each season. And then your little side adventures, little monster of the week things that happen. They kind of flesh things out and give you those kind of things. It's kind of like little breaks from that big thing happening. So you can think of it in that aspect of there. It's very much sort of we have this overarching plot we're dealing with, but there's a couple little things dropped in along the way. Um, It's 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 the way I'm running my game currently, and it's typically a lot of way the set campaign settings are kind of done that way as well. You have a main quest plot line you're following through. The other campaign style is the open world, where it's also called a sandbox, or it's a variation called a hex crawl. It was brought up last week. And it's very much like you are dropped in a portion of the map, and you, as the players, are just kind of meandering around trying to find out what's going on or what's there. It's great for exploration. It's great for like survival type games where you're basically trying to find resources for you and your party to survive, or maybe build up a settlement and keep going. It's a very different style of game, and it has its ups and downs compared to the other the narrative style as well. So to kind of compare and contrast the two, the narrative is going to require a good grasp of storytelling. You are going to be driving people through a story here, and it's really kind of how do you really get players to go where you want them to go? How do you get them to buy the hook that you're dangling out for them to go after the bad guy or to follow this plot line or deal with this group of people? And that can be definitely a challenge, is getting your players to do what you want to do. On the flip side, in the open world, there's a lot more prep in the idea of you have to prep everything they're going to run into. And if they go east, what do they find? If they go west, what do they find? What does this little symbol on the map mean that they're going to come across? All of those things could be plot hooks. Those could be things that you bring in, and there's something there to find out, something there to check out, and they want to go do that. But the campaign is very player driven. So if you have players that are not very decisive or not very engaged, the open world setting can be difficult for them and difficult for you to drive them along, because it's that same thing of like, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? You have that mentality of, I don't know where to go next. So you have to dangle a lot more things out there for them to go. And what find up happening is that even that open world campaign, a narrative thread start to pop up and quest lines start to occur, and you almost become a narrative style game. And so you're going to find that maybe in your narrative style game, you have some open world aspects. The players go to this island and there's all kinds of stuff for them to do there. What do they want to do? They want to explore and check things out. So you can kind of mix and match, kind of flip flop back and forth between the two different styles of campaigns, depending on how you have it set up. So you're not lumped into one style of campaign. You can't do anything else. It's your campaign. You do what you want. So some other things besides the overall overarching campaign, you have things like side quests, those monster of the week things, that little rumor of a tomb with a treasure in it. There can be red herrings. This might be related to the overall plot. It might not, but let's go check it out and see what happens. Oh, nothing's there. It was a fun ride anyway. The idea of factions involved, if they get involved with like certain guilds or certain things like that, think Skyrim. You have all the different factions along with the main quest. They can have their own quest lines that may or may not merge with other quest lines, and so you have this idea of these different aspects of things you can add into your game. If your players want to craft things or gather resources or build up a base of operations and have followers and retainers, these are all things that can kind of grow in your campaign. And it kind of is up to you to figure out how much of those elements do you want to have. You're the one in control of the campaign. So if you don't want to make those things available, you don't have to. But it's something to consider as you decide on the kind of campaign you want to run. Now, another offshoot of the open world campaign is a very interesting one, and you may have heard of this out there. It's the West Marches campaign, or West March campaign, or I'm not sure exactly how they refer to it exactly all the time. But the idea of a West March style campaign is it's a massive open world with multiple DMs running multiple parties kind of concurrently in the same world. And so you can have things like, oh, this DM is running an adventure over here. Maybe this person from this party wants to go and do that, and so they go off to do that. You kind of mix, so people can kind of move in and out of various parties. It's a very interesting style of campaign, and I've I've always been fascinated by the idea of it. But the logistics are going to be a nightmare. Trying to get one DM to get a campaign, try to get like 4 or 5 to work concurrent campaigns. It could be a challenge, but it could also be a lot of fun. So if you and a group of other people want to run a West March style game, I would say check it out. There's lots of resources and details online how to do that, and some people out there that are doing it. So I would say do a little research and check them out. It could be a lot of fun. Um, Something else in your game that might be really helpful, and this would work for some narrative games, it would work for some open world games here, is a troop style game. And a troop style game is where each player has maybe more than one, maybe 2 or 3 characters to draw from. And let's say this character is getting caught up in doing something for the town, but the end, but the party wants to go out of the city into the wilderness to go do something. This person doesn't want to leave. Well, this person might join instead. And so if you have multiple characters, that troop style of game means you could kind of move people in and out of the party based on A, composition, B, what you're trying to accomplish in a mission or an adventure. Or if a character gets killed, you have a backup ready to go. It is so in those kind of games, you have that freedom and ability to do that in a troop style game. And there are systems out there that lend themselves to this. The Star Trek role playing game is very much a troop style game. There's a system called Blades in the Dark. It's also very troop style. And there's a couple other systems out there, but those are the two main ones that really follow that troop style mentality. But it can be adapted to almost any setting, any campaign. Okay. So those are the kind of the things of when you're creating a campaign, what style of campaign? Do you want that more narrative driven? You want that more open world? You want to mix and match elements as you go? You want to bring in troop styles? Again, there's all these ideas of like when you're putting the overall art idea for your campaign, what style are you going for? Now, but that's kind of get uh, the idea of like I want to run a campaign. What am I going to run? Now we're going to get into the actual meat of creating a specific campaign. And the one thing about the biggest thing you get in order to run a successful campaign that I've found is getting players to buy in. And so for that, you want to think when you're creating your campaign a number of factors. What are the typical quests and adventure types are going to be in your campaign? Is it going to be a lot of wilderness exploration? Is it going to be an Underdark setting where you're dealing with that kind of thing? Is it going to be an urban-based campaign where you're dealing with maybe politicals or guilds, political aspects or guilds? Um, so, so the idea of like what type of quests and adventures you're going to have? Are you going to be doing like dungeon delving? Are you going to be doing um, like wilderness exploration? You're going to be doing like big long quests. And so that's going to what first I have to think of is like what type of quests and adventures are you going to would you like to run in your campaign? The next thing is what's the most common environment? If you're running a game, it's going to be mostly in a forest section, and a player wants to play someone who's an aquatic character, like maybe a Triton or something like that. They may not fit into the game very well. Or let's say you're going to be up in a snowy wilderness, and this person's from the jungle, a jungle race, maybe even like a Yuan-Ti or a lizard folk. That's going to be really uncomfortable for them. They're going to be really having it's going to be a little bit of a fish out of water kind of scenario, almost literally. So getting the idea of the most common environment you're going to have campaigns. This is also really important for like city-based campaigns versus wilderness-based campaigns because city folk don't do too well when you put them out in the woods, and vice versa. So it can be an interesting plot element, but it also can lead to some difficulty for characters and their skill choices and everything else. Um, and the other thing to think about your campaign before you even like start to pitch it to the players is what's the general tone of your game? Is it going to be a eldritch horror game? Is it going to be a survival game? Is it going to be a lighthearted high fantasy, low fantasy? That tone of the game is really important. Is it going to be a gritty, realistic campaign? Is it going to be a high epic fantasy, heroic type game? Is it going to be all meant for evil characters? Are you all going to be members of Thieves Guild or something else? Those are all sort of things to think about when the general tone of the game, and it's also the tone of the story you're going to tell together. So thinking about those things when you're creating the campaign, what kind of campaign are you going to run? And these things should be established at your session zero with your players. When you bring people together and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking of. Now, if the players go, oh, I don't like that survival style of game. I don't want to be in a horror game. I want something a little bit more lighthearted. That's important to know. And so you might want to come in there with options. Like, I'm thinking of a campaign like this, or maybe one like this, or maybe one like this. And they can kind of pick and choose what's going to be most fun for them. Now, obviously, you can not do that, but I'll tell you, it's going to be a lot more buy-in for your players if you don't throw things at them that they don't want. If people don't want political intrigue, don't put them in a city with politics and infighting and nobility and royalty. They're not going to have as much fun. So keep that in mind when you're kind of thinking of your campaign and you're talking to your players. Um, Again, this prevents the fish out of water aspect of like, I'm making a character who's this. That's not going to fit in this game. So you want to avoid that at all whenever you can. So um, uh, something to consider though um, is they may come to you with an idea that at first you go, no way, that's not going to work. But in talking with them, don't be afraid to like say, well, that might not work exactly, but let's tweak it this way, and it would work. And so the idea of as they start to make characters for a campaign, that's where you kind of work together and see what's going to fit, what's going to work best. So again, that's sort of the creation of the campaign, getting the players in, getting them excited, getting them to buy in on the initial steps. Okay. Then once the campaign's going, how do you maintain it? How do you keep it going? And this is really about player buy-in. How do you get them engaged? How do you keep them wanting to come back and play more and more? And there's some really good tips around this. Specifically, tie the story, tie the campaign, at least elements of it, bring in the players' backstories, the players' interests, the player characters' backstories and interests. If they are all in with this certain shopkeeper, make them an important part of the game, or at least a recurring part of the game, so the players have that feeling of like, hey, I made a connection here. This matters. Now I have a friend that I can do things with, or I have an ally I can do things with. So again, and then if you have something where you bring in their backstories, you're drawing them in that way too, because they decided what their backstory was, and now you're bringing those elements into the story and making them matter. And so that's where the players are going to feel like I'm a part of this world. And that's going to go a long ways toward keeping them engaged and keeping the play going if you can keep those things where you bring in those things. And eventually they're going to find their own motivations as characters as they find people they like or towns they like and they want to save from a big bad threat. Then you kind of have them hooked and it's rolling along nice and smooth. Occasionally check in with your players if things seem to be kind of like slowing down, they're not seeming as engaged there. After the game session, maybe between game sessions, just ask them, "Hey, how's it going? Are there things you want to see more of? Things you want to see less of? Were you okay with this scene here? Did it bother you?" And don't be afraid to just ask someone if how you can bring them more in. If they may just say, "Hey, I was tired that night. I wasn't feeling well. Why I didn't do much, but things are all really good. Things are really cool." And then you can kind of move on with what you were doing, but you might get some good feedback saying, "Hey, I'm not really into this political thing that's happening or this weird horror thing that's happening. Can we?" And so you might steer toward a different plot element to bring that player back in or bring the other players back in there. So checking in with your players is a good way to keep them invested. Um, uh, Similar to how um, the players um, backstories and interests coming in there, make sure your locations and your NPCs actually matter. If you just gloss over descriptions, if you just make them sort of like, oh yeah, at the general store, they have cheese there. Cool. And you don't see anything about the place and who runs it, what other cool things they might have there. That's gonna they're not going to have as much of a buy-in to it as if you describe it and get people into like, hey, this is a cool guy that runs the shop. He has these cool things that they have there. We can come back here and buy these things whenever we feel like. So, or in terms of a town or a city, making something about it memorable, something about it they want to come back to, or they may want to save if there's a problem. If you haven't given them a reason to like something and be invested in something, they're not going to worry if something comes along just to mess it up. Or if you do it off camera and like things just happen. Oh, you heard that town you were in got destroyed. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we're never going back there again. Those people I met don't matter then, obviously. Those buildings those shops I went to are all gone now. That's disappointing. So it kind of deflates the character's interest and excitement about things because the things that they experienced were are now gone. So keeping that obviously a plot element that puts those things in threat or somebody comes along and blows up a shop, now you're going to be invested in finding out what happened, who did that. But the idea of just like taking it just off camera just does it, it's not going to have the same gravity and it's not going to have the same interest level for the players. Again, make the NPCs, make the locations matter. Um, there's a little thing you probably heard of, and that's the railroad when it comes to campaigns. And the idea is that you're chugging along the railroad, and there's the plot, and we're going along the rails here, and oh, there's a cool thing over there. Can't go look at that. There's a cool thing over there. Yeah, can't look at that either. We're on the rails. Um, that's where players start to feel they have less agency in the plot, less effect on the story, and less importance in the world. If all they're just chugging along here and they see things that they can't go do, that's going to draw them out of the interest level of the game there. So what you want to do is that your rails are still there, but give them little things that, hey, you can go off and check this thing out over here. But you're going to be brought back to here for the story. So you kind of hide the rails, or let there be a little bit more of a meandering path where it isn't quite so obvious you're just going this route. So hiding the rails is a very good way to keep people invested. Um, those are some ways to kind of keep the campaigns going. But now you have that big bad evil guy, you got that big world-ending threat, that big event that's happening, this story element that they've been working towards and seeing towards. Um, how do you end the game? Well, uh, you end the game because you reach a conclusion story-wise, but the players may want to do more. So the idea of ending a campaign is something that should the players should see coming. They are working toward a specific goal. They are trying to take down this big threat, or they're trying to accomplish this big task. And once they do that, and assuming you've been playing for a while, it becomes a logical ending point for the game. If you just cut it off or just say, hey, that's there, there's nothing beyond it, you hit the wall and you're done, it's going to feel a lot less satisfying to the players. So really, when you think about it, is drive toward this culminating event and make it so that they realize this is a big ending thing. And when it comes to that point, maybe start giving the players a little nudge here and there saying, hey, wouldn't it be nice to retire with that shopkeeper you were hanging out with all that time? Wouldn't it be cool to go back to that village and hang out there? Or just having like maybe messages arrive from those people. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Good luck with what you're doing. And just sort of giving those little hints and nudges that maybe there's something beyond that big ending thing. There's something to do, something somewhere to go, a place to be. Think of it as what are you going to do after retirement? Sometimes you want to sit down and open up that bar in that small town and be the retired adventurer with a sword up on the wall. Maybe you want to start up that workshop and run that store you always wanted to, or settle down with some people and have a family. I mean, these are things that the players may want to do as part of the ending of a campaign. So make sure those opportunities are there. Make sure those little seeds are there as you go along. So it isn't just we get to the end and you're done. Now what? Well, I don't know. I don't have anything to do. This is all I did was this. So, in your thinking of the story, don't think of just how does the story end. Think of what can these players do? What can these players, what opportunities these players have once the story is over? So, endings have to be more than just, okay, job done. There, there needs to be some kind of an epilogue, some sort of a denouement of of where they go from here. So we've talked about campaign styles, the standard narrative versus open world, some variations there. And in our campaigns, we're looking at again the creation of the campaign, maintaining that campaign, and then an ending for that campaign. And I'd like to go and open up to some questions from folks right now. I see a lot of people in there, so we can kind of elaborate on some things here on what I talked about here, or throw some questions out to me in the chat, and we'll see what we can come up with from here. Let me see. Yeah, and as Justin pointed out there, in over a decade of playing tabletop role-playing games, never really had a campaign that hit a planned conclusion. And there's various reasons for that, obviously. So, obviously, life changes happen and players dropping out, coming, going. That makes it very difficult to keep things going for a long-running campaign. So, it is a challenge. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I've only had a handful of campaigns that had any kind of an ending, and only a couple of those had a satisfying ending. So I encourage you to think of that when you're thinking campaigns. They don't have to be 5-year, 10-year campaigns. They can be 6 months to a year and you're done, or maybe even 3 or 4 weeks and you have a short campaign. And maybe you do call that season one of your TV series. And then season two comes along and the same characters and maybe some tweaks. Jump into season two of your series and the campaign continues in sort of a season style aspect. Um, So Aaron asks, how do you truly begin playing, meaning to actually DM for the first time? Do you recommend Minds of Fandelver or some one shots to get ready for your own world? Um, yeah, actually, it is not a bad idea to try some short one shots just to get sort of the feel of the mechanics of how to get that flow of calling for skill checks when you should, and calling and doing those combat rounds of initiative and describing things and getting that style of how you're going to run games. It's great to start off with some one shots or some very short kind of pre-made campaigns. It's not a bad way to go, and you might find that if the characters are really into it and they're really excited about the characters they put together, the party they put together, that little one shot or that little Minds of Fandelver introductory adventure there might turn into something that goes longer. You can always stick those little one shots if you are building your own world. Stick the Minds of Fandelver. You maybe call it the Minds of Dorvanen, and rename a couple of things, but just drop it into your world and run that adventure. I've got a ton of adventures behind me here that I can literally just take and drop into a world and use it as a seed for a series of maybe short quests, maybe a full-on mini campaign within a larger setting. Um, so yeah, absolutely. I would say if you're wanting to you kind of get your toes wet with DMing, go with those short adventures, those little one shots here and there, and you'll find that I will kind of don't put yourself in the mindset of a one shot. One shots are very difficult to do. I found that one shots often turn into 3 or 4 shots because it's really difficult. It's a very specific set of skills and uh, um, organizational ability to make a game that just lasts for one session. So, um, so yeah, but yeah, don't be afraid to let that one shot stretch out over a couple of sessions to get there. The Green Dragon there, getting to the end is hard. Sticking the landing when you get there is rough. Absolutely, it can be. But again, knowing having idea of where you want to go with it, having idea that the players have something to pad that landing when they hit, in terms of things they kind of set up for themselves along the way, can really help make that. Because again, you want to have not just the ending of the story, the big killing off the big bad evil guy. It's what's the epilogue? What do they get to do afterwards? So, definitely a good comment there. Aaron's going to be back a little bit. Okay, cool. No problem. Um, but he does have a good question here before he goes. What do you do when you've written yourself in a corner and it seems ending is the okay? Because it seems ending is the best choice. Might be what you're trying to say there. Um, Writing yourself into a corner is something you can do. Again, if you're writing your own campaign and you're kind of like you can push things too far too fast, and suddenly you're pushing toward the end and the players aren't ready for it yet. So if you find yourself getting to the point where it's like, hey, the players are getting to the big bad evil guy way too fast, again, you control the rails. Divert. Have a side adventure. Have something come up that draws them off of that main path. And then as you think as they kind of go off in that direction, um, it may be a little less epic or a little bit less, not quite tied to that original thing there. But remember all those Monster of the Week things at X Files? Those are some of the most fun, memorable adventures sometimes, where those little side quests of like, oh yeah, that was a really cool little thing we did there, and now let's get back to the main story. And so you can use that as a way to kind of to get people uh, to give yourself little bit of a break. And one thing about writing yourself into a corner, I would say, if you have a notebook or a digital platform you're using or whatever you're using to kind of sketch out your campaign ideas, just every now and then think up a wild like side quest, something that might apply to someone's backstory or something that might be a fun little adventure. Let's think about throwing in a heist scenario where someone wants to hire the party to go rob something or prevent something from getting robbed. Maybe in that case, so if they got on the party you have. So it may not be related to the plot, but it's a good 3 or 4 sessions. You can kind of like have this fun, light little adventure while you kind of go back and think of where do I want this campaign to go? They're getting too fast. What can I do to draw this out or make something? And it might be that, hey, the big bad is here. Throw in some lower tiers, some some of the big bad's generals or lieutenants that are like, oh, these guys have their own things. I mean, think about Star Wars dealing with Dooku before you go after Palpatine. I mean, the idea is that you have these minions that are below the big bad guy that they can deal with. They're still bad. They're still doing terrible things, but you can kind of get there and go, okay, now there's more beyond that. Now there's more beyond that. And so you're not writing yourself into a corner so much as writing yourself into the first phase of a longer setting or longer campaign issue. So Justin here has, what levels do you feel generally appropriate to start a campaign in? Do you ever start in higher tier areas like 9 to 12? It really comes down to what you're doing with your party. If your idea is you want to jump into epic high fantasy and you want those guys rolling those fireballs in the first scenario, then and being able to raise dead on anyone that drops, that's a different tier of adventuring. And so again, when you're thinking about designing your campaign, um, that sort of kind of goes along with your tone and the idea of, well, rather than starting off at 1 or 3 or 5, let's jump in at level 9 and we're just going to go up from there. Now, understand you're probably going to need experienced players for that, because taking a brand new player and dropping into a ninth level character and saying go might be a way too overwhelming. So if you have experienced players, that's a great way to. You want to just get right to the meat of the campaign and get right up into the crazy stuff happening. That's a great way to start, is starting up at a higher tier, starting at level 9 and going up from there. Um, but again, appropriate start a campaign. It really depends on your campaign, what you want to do with your campaign, what your players want to do. If they want to start with brand new characters that are kind of finding their way in the world. You want to start off with like the mid-tier heroes who are ready to go off and save the world. Again, it depends on your campaign and what you want to do. Um, so, question for Green Dragon here. How long do you go into a narrative driven by one character's backstory? Make an entire campaign arc, or do you prefer shorter, bite-sized pieces of narrative? Um, I find it's some parts of their campaign, some parts of their story, or their can they it can be lend itself to coming in and getting resolved, and some of it might be sprinkled along the way. It really kind of depends on what that backstory arc is. Um, for example, in Avarice, we're finding that Amethyst's backstory, the fact that she's a shattered soul and she has this links to other people, she's met people along the way and found out that one of the people she's linked to might be maybe even the big bad evil himself. He's definitely linked to that big plot they're moving towards. So so it really kind of depends on the character's backstory and what that element is. So some they might get resolved, and it's for another character we had he one of his backstory was he was trying to find his brother who had been suspected of killing his parents. Um, Spoilers for the last couple of sessions if you're checking out Avarice, but basically that got it, like information was sprinkled along the way, but it got resolved pretty quickly last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess. So it really kind of depends on what that narrative bit is. If it's, hey, this is something that I'm trying to find out, well, at some point, give them a chance to find that thing out. And it may be that they get little bits of information around the way, or it just drops in their lap one day, and it's like, whoa, where did this come from? This is what I was looking for. Now what do I do with it? So they may not know they do not know what they do not know. So the idea of they're looking for this thing they've been trying to find all their life, and suddenly they have it. Now what do they do? What's next? So so yeah, in a way, um, it can be either, really, depending on what they are. And so the idea, again, bringing your characters in. I can tell you right now, one of the characters in my party, you might be listening right now, you might maybe not, um, has something that may not come into play until much later on, basically because it's a different part of the world where that thing is happening. So eventually may go there, but it all depends on um, the scope of that campaign, is the scope of that character's backstory. If it's a fairly localized thing or a very specific problem, it might get resolved. Or if it's a bigger thing, it might get stretched out over a longer campaign arc or an entire campaign if it's related. So hope that answers your question there. Uh, it, that's a big one. Um, yeah. Haha, yes, yes. Sora is here. So you know what I'm talking about. Kind of. What other questions do we have there? Any more there? To end on a perfect cliffhanger. Am I doing so consistently? Um, it's one of those things. Okay. Uh, my favorite author is one of my favorite authors is Jim Butcher, and he always says every chapter should be a cliffhanger because that keeps the player wanting to jump to the next chapter and keep going. So the idea of finding that good time to get there, it's a little bit of way. The way I do it literally is I'm watching the flow of the story, where they're going, and I know what's coming up. I know where things are going, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got 20 minutes left. There's the players are heading in this direction there. It's not enough time to really jump into this thing and get going. So we're going to draw it out with some different draw it out by adding some descriptions or letting the characters talk a little longer amongst themselves. And then when I'm right at that like 5 minute mark, I'm kind of like gearing up for it. And so I literally just have to watch my clock and know where my story is going. And same for a break too. Finding that break time where you kind of go, um, like if you want, like, hey, I need a break here. This is kind of going fine. This is kind of going fine. This is a good place to pause and let's move on. And so you don't want to pause in the middle of dialogue. You don't want to pause in the middle of a combat, but you say, hey, they're heading towards a combat. Let's have them get discovered, have the bad guys reveal themselves, and then break. And then when you come back, you start the combat up there. Or if it's the end of the session there, have some big thing happen. It sets up the following week. So um, it really is a matter of kind of again watching your time, knowing your story, and kind of getting to know your players. I kind of know how these guys will go. Um, so I kind of let them fill in them let them kind of fill in the gaps themselves sometimes. Um, okay. Uh, well, good follow up to that one there, Sora. How do you move the players along if they just want to RP and it's going nowhere? Well, the best way to do that is to interject. Either if they're just kind of like chit chatting, things are happening here, have something happen. You know what's going on around the players. And it might be that they're having a conversation, and they're having the conversation in the middle of a tavern, or in the middle of a city block, or in front of some other NPCs. The NPCs can just step up and go, "Excuse me, can we get back to this problem here?" And literally use the players or the environment or even the bad guys to cut that off and move it on. But if they're having fun and there's a good RP session happening there, feel free to let it go for a little longer. I love to just sit and let my players chat and work things out amongst themselves. But if I see it's kind of like devolving into just goofing around, which goofing around is also fun. But if it's not going to go anywhere, that's where I just use an NPC, use an environmental element, or use even a villain or a bad guy or whoever else to kind of come in and draw the information back to the story itself. Balancing encounters where the players feel in danger but never truly outmatched. Make it winnable, but no death is a real possibility. That's a tricky one. I will say, I do want to do a future episode on encounter design, and sort of and not only combat encounters but role playing encounters and everything else. But um, the short answer to that, because I want to get into a longer answer in a future episode, but the short answer to that is know your bad guys, have more bad guys waiting in the wings. If you've got a paladin, if you've got a rogue in your party, and they roll that crit and suddenly hit someone for 120 damage, and that was supposed to be the big boss, the encounter is going to be over. So having something that can rush in and help the guy heal him, in terms of if that's a possible thing, or if it's a flood of minions come in and start harrying the party, um, that's where you can really up the danger level so there's a lot more things to deal with, and the bad guy doesn't go down like a sack of potatoes. So that balancing that encounter is really, and I would say this: if you want a balanced encounter, never throw one enemy at the party. One enemy is going to die in 2 to 3 rounds tops. They can unleash all they have at this thing, unless it's got multiple legendary actions and layer actions and everything else. And that's not really one enemy anymore. But really, when you're thinking about balancing encounters there, if you throw one enemy, they're going to walk over it. I don't care what it is. It can be an elder dragon. Unless you do something absolutely insane, the party's going to walk over it because it's 5-on-1, 6-on-1, 10-on-1, depending if they have minions and or if it's a big party. So making it winnable is you have some big hits. You know your monsters are able to deliver some powerful hits. And knowing that your party has various ways to heal themselves, your party has various ways to disengage and get the heck out of there if you need to. Um, and so it does come down to knowing what your party can dish out, knowing what they can heal and what they can survive, and then kind of trusting in them to do what they do. Um, Although one thing we don't see very often is having a party retreat. it might be outmatched, and the party at some point hopefully will be aware of that and will back off or do what they can to de-escalate or get away from this thing before it does take them all out. Um, so that's a tricky one. Again, but I do want to get more into encounter design in a future episode because that is a big thing to making games more fun for everybody involved. Some other questions there. Some great questions today, guys. This is awesome. Using that teacher wait time. That 5 second count there. But I do want to so to kind of reiterate a couple things here, kind of the thread I'm seeing in here. Oh, good. Here's that one. Uh, how do you manage homebrew magic items to actually mean something to the players? Be powerful but not game breaking. There's actually I found a really good thing. Let me find out. What is that thing called? Um, there's a supplement out there I found called Ancestral Weapons. It's a really neat kind of thing that you can make. It has a system for making items that sort of level up with the players, so they can have that cool thing that they've found that's really kind of a signature item, but it isn't like ridiculously powerful over the top right off the bat. But it can sort of gain abilities over time, and so um, again, campaign wise, when you're done your campaign, if you drop in like the one ring on your thief in the very first adventure, your campaign is taking a whole different tone now and a whole different direction. So um, it's going to break the campaign. Um, so the idea of making an item, making some items that are interesting, have the potential to level up or do cool things down the road. The players have some items in my game that they almost never use because they don't need to, and it's something that eventually they may drop or sell or trade away at some point there, and that's fine. As they find better things down the road, um, they're, that's kind of a natural progression of loot. Anyone plays an MMO or any kind of adventure type game there, eventually you toss away that sword you made because it just doesn't cut it against this thing over here. But the cool thing then is that becomes kind of a big deal. Maybe you put that sword on a wall in your home, and now it's an heirloom piece, and you have this new cool thing that you're going to run around with because it's even better than that was. But that's sort of a nostalgia kind of thing. So so in homebrew magic items there, think about things the party doesn't have, things the party might go searching for. In my game, it is a high fantasy game, so there's a lot of magic items, a lot of magic they have access to, way more than the party's even utilizing at this point. But the option is there, and they can go for it if they want. And as they get cool things along the way, um, it really helps them feel more powerful and want to do more and experience more. So again, those items can be part of that campaign to keep it driving. And obviously, the One Ring was the end of that campaign when you tossed it into Mount Doom. It was that was it. So it could be that an item could be something that does drive a narrative arc or even end it. Um, Green Dragon, many campaigns die in the middle of the story, often because there's a slump in the narrative or pacing. Advice for spicing things up to re-engage players' interest. Um, Again, talk to the players, see what's going to jazz it up for them. Maybe go back through your session notes and see what kind of the high points were and what things they really got excited about and interested about, and bring some of those elements forward. Again, so in terms of like at least the style of adventure, that's a great one. But in terms of narrative and pacing there, if you have a good idea of where things are going, don't be afraid if things are getting to a lull of putting in a complication or a wrinkle or adding in something that the party hears about that, oh, this is related. Oh, this has now become a priority. We got to focus for this. In terms of the party, The very first thing they ran into were these little trollings, these little pint-sized trolls that were running around. They didn't deal with the trollings and until episode 28 or something. So 28 episodes later, like months and months of games later, before they actually dealt with them and finally finished them off. But things happened along the way where, oh, this was obviously an attack by these little trollings over here. Oh, this village was attacked and the party helped fight them off and then find out where they were. Now we need to go deal with them. And so it was a plot thread that kind of wove its way through other things happening, but it was always there as something that you can kind of fall back on. And now the party is really in the midst of where they're finding out a lot of big, terrible things are happening, but they weren't bored along the way. There was a lot to experience, a lot to learn about, a lot of people to meet and places to go along the way. So spicing things up again, um, give them a cool side quest. One of those things like something they find out about, or somebody hires them to go do something, and that can drive in a whole new, maybe new items that they find in the course of the side quest, new monsters or locations, some new NPCs, maybe some quest givers. So again, it's this awesome way of driving the narrative forward, either all in the same plot or take them off the rails for a bit, give them a cool thing to do, and then bring them back. So very great question there. Awesome. Um, Loot tables are a good idea for players of certain levels, a random possibility, but in theory, it's a risk of being too powerful too soon or limit the table. I typically don't like loot tables. That's just for me. Some people do it, and I think it's great. But again, you end up like you roll up a loot thing, and it's blah. Like nobody in my party is gonna want this. They're just gonna vendor trash this. Um, so the idea of some loot is going to be just stuff they sell and it's not a big deal, or just um, maybe do something with it along the way, just kind of sell it off or trade it in for something they do want. So there's that idea. But yeah, if you have something on your loot table that's like, for example, helmet teleportation in 5e is way too low rarity for what it does. You can teleport 3 times a day or whatever it was there. It's ridiculous. That should be like a legendary item. Teleporting is a big deal and something you can't do until level 13 as a wizard. So having that be like even a very rare item, I think it is, a purple in D&D, it's too low. But if you want to spice things up, give the players a chance there. Give them a helmet teleportation that only has 2 charges and it's gone. So now they have the opportunity to do something with that, and then it's gone, and they don't have it anymore. So it's a limited resource. So you may consider that something might be powerful, but give it a limit. Um, Make it so it's hard to recharge or it can't be recharged. So I would limit more of the items in the table if you're going to use a table, but look at the table and see what's on there and realize that, oh, this thing is too powerful. Let's get it off the table, put something else in its place. Um, I do use some tables to kind of generate ideas for loot. If you have loot tables out there, I'll use those random tables to kind of go, oh yeah, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, and drop those in a store or put those on an NPC, or a bad guy might have something like that. Um, or if you just have bad guys that you want to give them some cool items and that the party might like or the party might not, but it fits with the bad guys, like bad guys style, then by all means go for it. That's a fun narrative element or campaign element that getting that loot can spice things up again by giving a new ability, a new capability for the party. And quick story, I ran an evil campaign. And if you guys in my party, if anyone's watching this out there, one of them that's there, you'll know where I'm going with this. They're all evil characters. Their job was to take over this region. And in the very first like scenario, the first adventure they did, they ended up getting this item that was a magical prison. And by having the stone, you could touch it to someone and they get pushed in the prison. Well, cue like 6 months later, they've worked this whole scenario to find the prince of the realm, the highest nobility of this region, and they engineered this whole thing of getting themselves in this guy's good graces. They engineered an attack on the guy and then saved him from the attack. Invited him to dinner, had the book, had the gem, shook hands with him, and put him in the prison. That was it. I had an entire stat block for this guy for a massive fight, crazy thing like that, because that one item that they had from the like 6 months earlier that I'd even forgotten they even had, they were able to do this really cool thing. And yes, it was a bit of a letdown in some ways, but it was also a really cool moment of like, where did that come from? Oh my God, you guys did it. We're good. And so that sort of, I mean, there was more to the campaign after that, but that was like, that was one of the big things they had to do. And they were just able to do it because they had this item from way, way back. Um, so, couple more questions here. We are getting close to our time here, but a couple more questions there. But here's a good one. See, when giving an item that fits the player really well, fitting their traits and making a series of fortunate or unfortunate events for the player. Um, I know who's asking this question. Um, what's funny is that you get a feel for the players on what they like and don't like, for their characters, their style of their character, and seeding an item in there that's going to be something they're definitely going to go for. But it makes logical sense for what you put into the world so far. Um, it's you. Some items are like, yeah, this player's going to take this one, or some items it's like somebody in the party is going to use this. I don't know which one, but let's see where it goes from there. Let's see what they do, what they decide to do with it. And so it can obviously have, if it's a cursed item or has some sort of a drawback to it of some kind. Again, it's another story element, another campaign element. It could even be an arc on how to get that curse lifted. It could be, what do we do with this now that we have it? Whom or someone else might want to come along and steal it. Again, another story arc comes from this one item that the party has. So, um, so the secret really is some of it. You just like, hey, this is cool. Someone's going to like this. Now they have it, and they may use it at various times in the campaign, and it's going to add. It makes some fun moments for the player and the party to have this thing being used. And sometimes it might bring back a negative story element based on what it is, or how they got it. It could also be something. It's like if they got it off a dead body, well, maybe that that person's family discovers they have it and they think they killed that person to get it, and now they're basically sending people out to go after the party because they think they're murderers. Um, that's off the top of my head, but that's something that could happen. Uh, so it's time for one more question, I think. If anyone has a question out there they want to throw out here, in terms of campaign ideas or um, story elements or narrative elements. Guys, just a minute. If anybody out there has one. And while you're thinking and or typing, um, I would say just don't forget, if you have questions and you want to just put them in the comment section of the video, feel free to drop them in there. I can either answer them or somebody else might, or start a little discussion around it. That's totally cool. Um, so if you think of something after this session, or if you're in the future watching this, and something jogs your memory idea, drop a question in the comment section. We'll kind of roll with it from there and kind of going. Or if you have any suggestions or ideas for future episodes you want to have, some future you want to talk discussions you want to have, drop those in the comments as well. Um, Appropriate time to get dragons in the fray or more powerful entities. Um, it depends on what those entities are doing. If it's more of a benevolent dragon who's giving them quests, um, and is going to basically put them on a narrative path or a campaign arc based on someone giving them quests, can be early on. If it's enemies, well, then you want to look at the kind of judge the capability. I wouldn't judge it. I wouldn't drop it on the very first adventure, but 4 or 5 sessions in, the party runs into something. Oh my gosh, this is bad. Runs away from it, dragging somebody that got knocked unconscious by it away. Um, that can happen too. Um, you may also consider, rather than dropping into the fray, dropping in hints or ideas about them, stories about something that's out there, or legends of a dark presence in the forest or some monster in the cave, be it a dragon or something else. Those legends may draw the players into going and finding out more information about it, or they may, hey, let's go find out. And they go out there, and if they go out right away, you might need to tone it back so they don't just die, or set it up so they do need to run away from it. So, appropriate time to get in there is whenever it fits in the story, whenever you think it's going to drive the narrative forward. So I think we're out of time here now, folks. But I want to say thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for being here. Um, I think maybe we will uh, drop some comments some suggestions in the comments on future episode next episode we want to do. I'm leaning toward maybe encounter design, location, or NPCs designs. But I could be talked into something else there in the comment section. So thanks for being here again. Join our Discord, House of Gamers. Tune in for Avarice, the Shattered World, or our other campaigns that happen on different days there. Our schedule is all up. Our schedule is up on our Discord server as well. You should see on our channel when things go live if you're subscribed and you're getting notifications when things are going to go live. We have a campaign that runs on Sunday that's also streamed, the Forged Stars, and then some other campaigns you could listen into if you're a member of the Discord server. You can hop in and listen as well. So thanks again for being here. You've been awesome, and I can't wait to talk to you guys again. But until then, get out there making those games. Have a great time. Okay, thanks again. Bye, everybody.